One of the books that I read a couple of years ago is called Enchantment by a writer called Guy Kawasaki. And he says there are two sorts of people in the world. There are pie eaters and pie bakers. And organizations and people that are pie eaters go, there is one pie. If you take 2 slices, there's less for me. And the other two organizations are pie bakers. And they go, do you know what? We're just going to build a bigger pie. And my every experience of the power of diverse thinking and diversity of people. And I stress that as well, because it is about making sure that if all you have is people that think alike, even if they look or sound just different, that won't do either. You need people who are bringing their own lived experience, their difference to the mix. That makes for an organization that will grow, that will build bigger pies. And so it doesn't become a zero-sum game.
Hi, my name is Nadia Nagamutu, business psychologist, coach, speaker and founder of Avenir Consulting, which creates organisational growth and success via inclusion and diversity. We've been discussing the benefits that diversity brings to companies' bottom line performance for decades with more and more evidence. But there are so many questions organisations still have about how to achieve it. How do you create a culture where people feel valued for their uniqueness and the qualities they bring? I believe it's crucial to the future success and sustainability of every organisation that they find the answer to this question, to make sure that each employee is not only supported but also appreciated. With this podcast, I aim to get some of the key challenges to creating inclusive workplaces out in the open and start uncovering the solutions to embracing a culture that cares for everyone. I'm going to be having conversations with some of the most inspiring people in different countries and across industries who are pushing the boundaries on inclusion and diversity in the workplace, from topics such as parenting in the workplace, ethnicity, age, gender, mental health, and all things inclusion. I want to create a movement to change society through sharing life experiences and creating more empathy and connection. Why care? I believe that once we have organisations and societies that accept and value everyone for who they are, we become healthier, happier, and better in our roles both inside and outside work. Hello, and welcome to episode 32 of Why Care. My name is Nadia Nagamutu, and I am your host. In this episode, I speak to an inspiring business leader, Sue Unerman. Sue is the Chief Transformation Officer of Essence Mediacom X and Global Head of Relevance for Essence Mediacom Creative Futures. Prior to her latest book, called Belonging, The Key to Transforming and Maintaining Diversity, Inclusion and Equality at Work, Sue co-authored the book, The Glass Wall, Success Strategies for Women at Work and Businesses That Mean Business, and a marketing book called Tell the Truth. In our conversation, we talk about DEI fatigue, not just from those in the majority who feel like they are no longer welcome in the conversation, but also those in the minority who are tired of the constant fight to address inequities. Sue explains that belonging can only be achieved if people lead from every seat. We talk about how a growth mindset is the only way to approach DEI and the importance of mindfulness in building the courage to champion a culture of belonging. Sue shares some powerful stories from her book, which creates such an important dialogue about what we still need to work on. Enjoy. Sue, it is an absolute pleasure to welcome you onto the Why Care podcast show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you very, very much for inviting me. It's a great podcast.
Oh, thank you very much. I am absolutely honoured to have you as one of the co-authors of Belonging, The Key to Transforming and Maintaining Diversity, Inclusion and Equality at Work, on to my show to talk about some of the key concepts that I found fascinating in your book. It's a word, belonging, is something that has entered the DEI space not that long ago. If you think about sort of, it was initially diversity and then we spoke about equality and then we sort of thought of the distinction between equality and equity and then we added inclusion. And I think it feels like belonging came after that. So I'm really excited to explore what belonging means and how you've portrayed it so beautifully, actually, in your book. And thank you for doing that. So my first question, just because I ask this of all my guests, if you could give us just the lowdown, your background, how you came to write the book with Catherine Jacob and Mark Edwards.
So I've worked in advertising for a very long time. When I started out in the industry, there was a woman Prime Minister. Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister. I wasn't necessarily a fan of hers, but she was a woman and she was running the country. And my first my first job in advertising was a woman. And this is in the 80s. It seemed obvious to me that very soon every other boss would be a woman, because why on earth not? And I kind of got on with my career and worked and everything. And around 2014, I went to my boss, who's still my boss actually, Nick Lawson, and now my global boss. And I had written a previous book on marketing called Tell the Truth, Honesty is Your Most Powerful Marketing Tool. Had been quite successful. I went to him and I said, I'm thinking of writing another book, a follow-up to the previous book. Is that okay with you? Will you support it? And he said, yes. He said, but then slightly unexpectedly, he said, but that's not the book you should be writing. And I said, oh. And he said, I'll tell you what you should be writing. You should be writing a book about women at work, gender equality. Lean In would not have been a book for me in my 20s because I'm quite an introvert. And Lean In, and I think Sheryl Sandberg has acknowledged this subsequently, is very much for driven extroverts.
Indeed.
That kind of phone everyone, go out all the time.
Yeah.
Use your list. I kind of felt like it wasn't really a book that I would have personally found kind of helpful. So I went to a friend of mine in the industry, Catherine Jacob, and I said to her, I'm thinking of writing about a book about women at work and why it is that every other boss isn't a woman. She's a CEO, so she's an unusual sort of woman CEO in our industry. Will you write it with me? She said, yes, of course. And we wrote a book together. It was a bestseller called The Glass Wall, Success Strategies for Women at Work and Businesses That Mean Business. We gave over 150 talks.
Wow, incredible.
Pre-pandemic, they were all in real life.
Yeah.
And as we were giving these talks, we noticed that a question kept coming up at the end of them, which was there would normally be mainly women in the room. They would be for the Fast Track Women or the Women's Network, or it would be International Women's Day. And towards the end of the Q&A session, which were always very lively, a woman might put her hand up and she'd go, I've got a question, but it's not actually for Sue or Catherine, my co-author. It's for the organisers of the talk. She'd look around the room and she'd go, can I just ask, where are all the men? The organisers of the talk will go, well, it's the Women's Network, or it's, International Women's Day, or there's only 100 chairs and we knew we had 110 women that wanted to come. And then she would go, it's happened more than once, okay, but if we only talk to ourselves, how is anything going to change? And this really started resonating with us and stuck with us. And then we started also to explore intersectionality, other exclusions from that boardroom that's still mainly largely populated by one kind of person. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the FTSE 100 and the FTSE 350 stats, you find that, yes, there are more women now on boards, but they are largely non-executive director women. They are not executive directors, and there are still very few. We are a long way from every other boss on the FTSE being a woman, mm-hmm. or indeed a person of colour, or indeed not a white man called Steve, actually.
Yeah.
And so we actually started to think about the things that we'd written in the glass wall and how actually there are all kinds of people that are excluded. And we decided that what we wanted to do was write a book. Although the glass wall had not specifically been written for women, it was for everybody in the workplace. It was largely bought and read by women. And we wanted to write a book that was absolutely for everybody, that everybody would pick up. And that's why we also invited my husband, Mark, who is a writer, professional writer, to write it with us, because we wanted to include a perspective from a straight white man. And so the point about the belonging book is to look at those exclusions in the world of work, talk about case studies, shared experiences, pragmatic ways to overcome the barriers to a more equitable and fair workplace, particularly at senior levels, and to have a point of view that empathized actually with everybody out there. Because what we found was a huge incidence of diversity fatigue. And this was different from when we were writing The Glass Wall, from when we were writing Belonging. The interesting thing about this diversity fatigue is it sort of affects people in two ways. It affects the very people who it's meant to help, who are tired of, it's International Women's Day, come and speak on a platform, or it's Black History Month, come and speak on a platform, and then the rest of the time nothing changes.
Yeah.
So they are tired of that and of being invited to be a poster person for whatever they are, asked to represent.
Yeah.
But it also, diversity fatigue affects the men who are in power, who are tired of having the finger pointed at them, who are so fearful of getting something wrong and making a mistake that more than one of them said to us when we were doing the interviews for the book, it feels like a witch hunt out there for people like me. Like, well, it's not a witch hunt though, is it? Because that was about menopausal middle-aged women across Europe. That's
Yes, if we really go back in history, I think you'll find
it's women who wouldn't do as they were told was largely the victims of witch. So it's not a witch, but that's how they're feeling. And while the people who are sitting in the boardroom seats are feeling that, things are not going to change. So we wanted to, the ambition was to write a book that would help everybody become a champion of belonging.
And what a brilliant purpose to start with, to have a book that has that purpose of bringing everyone together. Let's unpack it now. One of the early things you say, actually, in the book is that the secret of belonging is it must belong to everyone. And I love that. So how do organisations achieve this? And I appreciate that that's a big question in itself, but what are some of the things that maybe you've seen organisations do to achieve? It seems like such a huge goal that it must belong to everyone. How do you measure that then?
Well, I mean, it is measurable, and we do measure it at Essence MediaCom, which is a company I work for worldwide and across WPP. And in fact, there is a survey for our industry that's just about to come, its second year of results, called the All-In Survey, which is for everybody in the advertising and media industry. And asking people, do they feel like they belong in their organisation, is one of the key questions. So it is something that you can ask and you can measure. It's something that we believe needs to belong to everybody. If the CEO of the company says it's important to have a sense of belonging, but I'm outsourcing this to my HR person, however wonderful the HR person is, they cannot achieve this on their own. If a junior person in the company goes, if they don't sort themselves out, I'm out of here, you have to play a part in doing the sorting things out. It has to be something that everybody actively does. So I think, obviously, vision and behaviours being set from above. We've done a lot of training around things like microaggressions. We have a set of behaviours that are about offering to help people, being inclusive. All of these things matter. But I think culture isn't just about a set of words. Culture is about how everybody behaves daily, how they interact with each other. And, I have worked in situations where I have felt othered, as I'm sure many of your listeners have, and perhaps you have. And it's horrible. It's sometimes very intangible as well. You just feel you're not welcome for whatever reason. But what we do know is that diversity within organizations strengthens them. And diversity, that's not just diversity of appearance or ethnicity or sexuality or gender. It's also diversity in terms of thinking. And so having an open and inclusive culture means that you don't necessarily get consensus about everything all the time, but you have to be creative perhaps about how you get teams to work together. And one of the things that we talk about, so Karen Blackett, who is OBE, who is the UK president of WPP, who I've worked with for more than 20 years. She's fabulous. She was very young when she started working with me. But we've worked together for a long time, and she wrote the foreword for the Belonging book, one of the two forewords of the Belonging book, because we asked Karen to write it, but we also asked a man to write a foreword as well, to have two perspectives. And one of the things she says in it is she talks about her Avengers Assemble theory of teams. And I'm a bit of a superhero fan, and so is her son. So, we share that. And she talks about in the Avengers, you've got a team that don't necessarily get on together day to day, that can sometimes argue with each other, that are very different, but that when they have a common aim and a common goal, they are invincible. They have superpower. And I think that Avengers Assemble attitude to teams is just really, really important. And everybody can play a part in this. Everybody needs to ensure that everybody in the room or on the call feels welcome. Everybody needs to just pick up and be an ally to people. There's a lot of techniques about that in the book, because actually, if all of us stopped being bystanders, the cultures would change. And that's something that we can all do something about. And sometimes it's very difficult, but opting to do something positive, I think, is one of the key things, and that has to come from every part of the organisation.
Yeah. I suppose when I think about it, coming from all parts of the organisation, do you think it's ever possible to create a multinational company that has a sense of belonging throughout?
Well, I hope so. There's 10,000 of us at Essence Mediacom. We have a strong ambition to create a sense of belonging for everybody. The differences that it takes to create that are in all of our hands.
Yeah.
So I am an optimist about it. I do not underestimate how difficult it is, but I am an optimist about the possibility, yeah.
Because one of the things that you say in the book, which I love, is exactly what you've been saying now, leading from every seat. And that's about everyone taking responsibility for belonging. And you say in the book, this is quote, every organisation needs the right leadership. But if everyone is always waiting for those leaders before they act, then the culture is in turn too dependent on a pyramid peak. I'm wondering, do you think in reality that people in an organisation would actively work towards inclusion unless they saw something happening at the top? Where does it need to start?
Yeah, somebody sent us a quote when we were doing the research for the glass wall, which I'd not come across before, which is, a fish rots from the head. I think it's an Eastern European saying.
I can't say I've heard of it, but...
No, I've not heard of it. And what they meant was that you do have to have that leadership. If you haven't got a leadership that's focused on inclusion and belonging, then it is very, very difficult. Right. However, one of the other things we talk about in the book, you might not remember, is something called transaction analysis.
That's Eric Burns' work, right?
That's right, yeah. I find it so useful. It's kind of like, it's that in every single interaction, you have a choice. You can be adult to adult, or you can be parent-child, or child to child, or parent to parent. And what you want to aim for at work is adult to adult. We are all grown-ups. We can all make a difference. We can all have an impact on the workplace. And what I was chatting before we came on, and I just changed jobs, and after a long time of being in one organisation, and the kindness, generosity, the openness of people to this newbie at my current agency, EMX, and the global division, Creative Futures, the friendliness, the warmth, the reaching out to make me feel included has been a wonderful experience. And that hasn't come because the boss said, make her welcome. That's come from the day that I walked in the building and somebody noticed that I was new and I didn't know where I was going, and they reached out. And I think it's that everyday kindness. One of the things that we say, as you say, is you must lead from every seat, and you can lead from every seat, and not wait for the organisation to tell you what to do, but actually to live by your own values. But that shouldn't be a radical thing to say. Some organisations take that as a radical thing, but I think leadership from every seat and kindness is, genuinely treating others as you would like to be treated yourself just makes all the difference.
Yeah. And it's amazing, isn't it, that what you've just articulated there is belonging in action. It's someone walking over to you, noticing something that might help you, offering a hand to say, oh, is there something I can do to support you here? And it's amazing just being seen, being noticed, that value that is placed on you as a human being. It's just sort of demonstrating humanity.
And if there's one thing I do know, is that everybody wants to be heard.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be recognised.
Exactly.
And I remember seeing a video of Oprah Winfrey talking about this. And she said that everybody that went and sat on her couch would lean over to her after they stopped filming. And, they could be a president, they could be an ex-president, they could be a movie star, and they'd lean over and they'd go, was that okay? And she said, even Beyonce's on stage being Beyonce. And then she leans over to Oprah, was that, you're Beyonce, of course it was okay. Wants that bit of recognition to be heard, to be seen, that to know they've come across okay.
Yeah. It's so true. Just that validation, that sort of, am I doing the job that I would like to be doing? And we look to each other for that. It's like our benchmark.
It's human, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. An organisation that has that empathy, that kindness that you're talking about, the ability to connect at that level, to recognise each other and see each other at that level.
As opposed to being judgy or it not being good enough, or is that, I don't know, Nadia, do you think that's good enough? Is that sort of dialogue, which is part of some organisations and probably too many organisations' cultures, is very, very hard to navigate. And if everybody rises, the organisation rises. If you rise within the organisation by pushing other people down, which is how some cultures at work do behave, then it's, first of all, tougher to survive. But secondly, if everybody's rising, if everybody's lifting each other, then you can see how you would float higher.
I'm wondering about the courage that's needed within organisations to navigate some of the complexities and also some of the knotty and messy conversations that need to be had. There's that fear that I hear in when I'm speaking to leaders and within organisations, where they fear that if they look at the top and say, for example, it is mainly men, that working on diversity, equity, inclusion and belonging means that if we continue down this path of supporting DEIB, then that inevitably means that that makeup of whoever's at the top will have to change. And so those men are out of a job or will have to be moved on at some point. So how do we get over that and still achieve a sense of belonging for those men or those people at the top who might now feel like actually they're not as welcome, they don't belong as much in the organisation that has a belonging endeavour?
So I think there's two answers to this. One is that every organisation is on its own path and on its own journey, and things sometimes don't and can't change overnight. But the second thing is believing in the real power of diversity. So we tell a story at the beginning of the book that about when the first women doctors were licensed, and the lead organisation in America said, 50% of doctors will be women soon, and that will mean there's an awful lot of men out of a job. And of course, 50% of doctors are women, but there are 10 times the number of doctors. The profession has grown and grown and grown. If you've got a growth mindset, if you're not thinking it's a zero-sum game, but an additional game. And one of the books that I read a couple of years ago is called Enchantment by a writer called Guy Kawasaki. And he says there are two sorts of people in the world. There are pie eaters and pie bakers. And organisations and people that are pie eaters go, there is one pie. If you take 2 slices, there's less for me. And the other types of organisations are pie bakers, and they go, do you know what? We're just going to build a bigger pie. And my every experience of the power of diverse thinking and diversity of people, and I stress that as well, because it is about making sure that if all you have is people that think alike, even if they look or sound different, that won't do either. You need people who are bringing their own lived experience, their difference to the mix. That makes for an organisation that will grow, that will build bigger pies. And so it doesn't become a zero-sum game. It might be a different role. It might be a horizontal role for some people, but it's about having a growth mindset.
Yeah.
It feels to me as though things are not changing fast enough in that respect.
The problem, I think, here, and I'm completely in agreement with you, but I think what people struggle with is that it's so intangible. What we're trying to get them to do is imagine a different reality. It's imagining that something will happen in a reality that doesn't look like their own. And so there's a trust there. There's a bit of taking a leap of faith. And people don't like taking a leap of faith when it's about them and their future and their kids' future. And, because I had it in one of my workshops, I'm really fearful for my 3 white, blue-eyed boys when they come into the workplace, that it won't be a place for them.
Yes. On a very, very basic level, we've got a lot about breathing techniques and mindfulness in the book. We've got a lot about how you build up your own courage, how you let go of those things and move forward. And our advice to anybody in that position is the way through this is to become a champion of belonging yourself, because then you will have a seat in the business room of the boardroom of the future.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. Not in the sense of if you can't beat them, join them, but similar to that, be allies, stand alongside people, and you'll find that they welcome you.
And also, just to add, if your only value to the organisation is that you're blonde with blue eyes and not a woman, that feels like it's not a great career plan anyway, does it? Actually, if you actually really just knock it down to that. So I'm sure there is all kinds of value that you bring from experience, from capabilities, from your own kind of quirkiness and geekiness. And that's the basis of moving forward.
There's a story that you offer actually in the book around a transgender woman. And it really hit home to me. You talk about this rhetoric, bringing your authentic self to work. And I think I've said it before. I think many of us have probably said it, that diversity, equity, inclusion means being your authentic you. In the book, you explain that she makes it feel like she has to share aspects of who she is when she might not be quite ready to. And so it made me think, okay, so what's the balance that we're trying to strike here with belonging? Should it be that the organisation is aiming for people to feel like they can share anything and everything about who they are, and that's what belonging is? Is it possible for us to hold on to our personal stories and not share everything, but still feel like we belong?
I think it's a very personal and individual answer. First of all, just about bring your whole self to work, bring your authentic self to work. Nobody actually means that, by the way. I mean, let's just not let them.
Yeah.
Because they don't mean you on a bad day when you don't want to get out of your pajamas.
No one wants that.
Normally, actually what people mean is what the late, great Vivienne Westwood called your best self. So it's like bring your best self to work. Should you have to hide aspects of that? No, I don't think you should. But how much of it you share or you feel comfortable with sharing, I think is entirely up to you. I know in this particular case, the person that I spoke to in confidence felt as though she wasn't ready for the amount of attention that she would get, because it's still, in the industry she was working in, was an unusual story. If we think about how things have changed for women, it's not that long ago. It's 60, 70 years ago, maybe even less, probably more like 50 years ago. If you got married in some industries as a woman, then that was your retirement party. That was your resignation. I'm getting married. Oh, sorry that you're leaving, right? We once did an amazing talk for women in the armed forces. And there was a woman in the room who remembered when she wasn't allowed to wear anything other than a skirt on a ship. So she was in the Navy and she had to wear a skirt. These things are not far away. Those things have changed. I used to, when I first came back to work after having kids, my kind of like area was decorated with pictures of the babies, and I didn't have to feel that I had to kind of cut them off in terms of my experience. And I think that being integrated is very healthy. So integrating your work self and your home self, which is something that I probably did much less before I had children, and then I did much more of when I had children, and the business that I worked for allowed that and kind of encouraged that. That felt both healthier, but also there were compromises both ways, in the sense that if I had been at work and taken a call that one of my children, I mean, even now, if my children calls me and they're all grown up, I would say, sorry, Nadia, I've got to go. I hope you don't mind. And you would go, no, I don't mind. In return from that, I was also able to accept that if it was one of the days that I wasn't working and my boss really needed me, I mean, really, really needed me, he could call me and I could have a conversation. And that there's that kind of, balance. That was my experience. And I was comfortable with that. Not everybody is, but I do think that blending work and life is probably a better way of thinking of it than balancing, as though these are two things at the opposite end of the seesaw.
Yes, absolutely. And what I'm hearing there is that you felt able to share something that was going on for you, that you had children and visibly around you for people to notice, and that was part of your identity. And to know that it wasn't going to impact how you were perceived.
Having said that, I will give Catherine's shared experience now as well. So my co-author for The Glass Wall and one of the co-authors for the Belonging book, she's CEO of Pearl and Dean, which is an advertising cinema company. And she is frequently asked, how do you manage to be a CEO and be the mother of two? And she has frequently pointed out that no one ever asked her husband, also a CEO, how do you manage being a CEO and a father of two? So these perceptions do still hang around, but we are all allowed to wear trousers to work. I'm wearing trousers today. I would remark while we're on this, which may seem slightly at a tangent, I have yet to be in more than one meeting, I think, in my career where I have been in a meeting with a man in a dress or a skirt. So it's weird how those things are. That's very sticky, right? So I am wearing trousers today. In the 1920s, they would have gone, oh, you're cross-dressing, right? But probably if I was to look at the lovely women that kind of work here, or even the people that assign as women, there's probably at least 50% of them are wearing trousers. What percentage of the men are wearing skirts today? 0. Isn't that weird?
It is. And you're going to take me off on a tangent as well, which is a passion of mine. Why do we have to create gender frameworks about what boys should dress like and what girls should dress like? And of course, that just comes from just deeply embedded views and stereotypes in society. And also, sadly, that it's okay for a girl or a woman to act more masculine. You know, that's more acceptable, and she'll be called a tomboy, you know, she'll be labelled, you know, but that's okay. It's almost cool. But actually, if a boy was to show more feminine traits, or if a man was to wear a skirt, as you've just said, that actually we really struggle with that in society. And it says, and for him, who's showing those more feminine traits or wearing more feminine clothes, the marginalisation and ostracisation and discrimination that he would face is far greater than if a woman stepped into a more masculine role. And so what does that say about our view of men and women and the value that we place?
Because that's one of the points that we make in the book, which is that if things get better for 50% of the workforce, the women in the workforce, they will be better for everybody. I mean, if things become more equitable, they're better for everybody. There's this sort of little story about the Titanic, which is that the sinking of the Titanic was so devastating because there weren't enough lifeboats, because the rule was you only had enough lifeboats for the women and the children. And so there weren't enough lifeboats for the men. And one of the campaigning slogans of the suffragettes at the time was votes for women, votes for men, because they made the point that they would have regarded that as a ridiculous piece of old-fashioned patronising gallantry. And of course you need enough votes for everybody. And I think the weirdness of the fashion thing, because again, the stories that you tend to see is, you know, I bought my daughter something that had robots on it and it was supposed to be for boys, and fewer stories that go, my son wanted to wear something with princesses and fairies on. So it's very deep rooted in society. And of course, as far as the colour pink is concerned, it's a Victorian construct because it used to be
the other way around. Yeah, pink for boys, I know. And this is something quite fundamental in our society, you know, in our schemas, in our deeply embedded stereotypes in all of us that needs to be overcome in order for people to feel that they can be their best self, which could be a man wearing a dress or a skirt.
Why not?
The number of times my husband's just sweated in his suit or his jacket and just looked at me in my light floaty cotton dress on the way to work or something. And he's just like, I really wish I could wear that. You know, and he could, of course, not that he would fit in my particular dress, but he could wear a dress. But what would be the consequence?
It's still a joke or something that people would mock, or it's a big statement in a way that me turning up in trousers is not. And so all of that is quite interesting. And I think we can't solve it, but it's just interesting to observe, I think.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing there is that there are some sticky areas of diversity, equity and inclusion that mean that still, no matter how much we create an environment of belonging and we show that kindness and that empathy and we reach out the hand to allow people to feel that as much as possible that they belong, that because of people's individual identity characteristics, for example, if they are transgender, or that they still might hold on to aspects of themselves that it's just societally, not necessarily about the organisation, but societally, it is not acceptable for them yet to feel like they belong more broadly. Is that what we're saying?
Well, I mean, I think there's just a lot of work and you need to be very precise and very careful. in language and inclusion. One of the things in the book was about someone who'd stopped the fancy dress rule for a party because the fancy dress rule for some party at work was ski chic. And she went, not everyone has a ski outfit. The organisers would go, oh, everyone's got a ski outfit. It'll be really great, well, everyone will turn up. It will be lovely. And she kind of went, no, that's a very middle class thing.
Yes.
Let me tell you, not everybody has a ski outfit. They are very expensive. Not everybody goes skiing every year. So there are all sorts of times and moments. And I think we can just, if we're all awake to it, and I'm trying to avoid using the word woke because that's become a disparaged term. But if we are conscious of it, we can all make a difference.
Yeah.
It is our job from any position of privilege, and I sit in a very privileged place here. I think whatever your place of privilege is, whatever your background's been, wherever you are now, it is your job to reach out, to open the door.
And that leads me on to sort of what you say in the book around signposting exclusionary behaviour, calling out microaggressions. And you also mention around finding a wing person, someone who can make that stand or speak out and say something that they might have seen or heard. So how can leaders make it safe for people to do that? So how can we create that culture where people actually are all right and say, do you know what, this is what I heard, even if it comes from a senior leader saying it? How do we create that in an organisation?
Certainly training, I think, makes a difference, and role play within that training. So I've done quite a lot of training. The most useful thing, and I haven't done very much of it actually, but it was the stuff that really helped, was the role play. Because it is hideous if you're the person that has to speak up and say something, and the person that you're saying it to is maybe your line manager, or the person that's going to decide if you get promoted, or the person who's deciding if you're going to get a pay rise, it's very, very difficult to do that. Of course it's difficult to do that. And does it have to be you? Does it always have to be you that speaks up? Do you have to speak up every time? All of those things are very difficult. So I think role play training, it has made a big difference to me. And I've done some training that's stuck with me more than others. And we've done a lot of it across the organisation. But I think it's when leaders themselves exhibit those behaviours that it makes a difference. And it might not be the most important person in the room, but it could be somebody else in the room. So again, one of the stories in the book, and this really happened. So we were doing a glass wall talk, and then we've included it in the Belonging book. And we were doing a talk for a conference of women legal general counsel, so quite a senior level. And we did our talk, and then a woman put her hand up and said, how would you have handled this? She had just joined a new organisation. She was the only woman on the senior leadership team. She arrived to a meeting slightly late. She was on a client call. There were 7 people in the meeting, including her. There were only 6 chairs. She just had that moment where she walked in, looked around and went, oh, there's no chair. And I'll go and get one, in a slightly flustered way, because you don't always know where to get a chair from. And the CEO of the company slapped his knee and said, don't worry about that, Nikki, come and sit on my knee.
No.
What would you have said? And we were like, and we sort of talked a bit about it and what she could have said and what she could have done. And the thing that was really most disappointing was that the other members of the senior leadership team didn't do or say anything.
Yeah.
So from the take my chair, I'll go and get one because I know where they are, isn't a gallantry thing.
That's just kindness, isn't it? Exactly.
Through to had the beefy chief financial officer said, oh, David, I'll come and sit on your knee, made a joke out of it. That would have been a great way of detracting from it.
Yeah.
But nobody did. And I can remember talking to one senior man about this issue, and he went, oh, I bet they all thought, good, she won't last long. I bet it's the sort of organisation where people are kind of like climbing over each other, and she's come in and she's new and got a great reputation, and they're kind of thinking, oh, she's vulnerable though. The answer to the question is back to that. Everybody has to take this on as their job. It's not somebody else's job. It's everybody's job.
Yeah. That story makes me feel sad. Is that really what is built on an organisation's success, that they have people who are fighting and vying for position to the detriment of others?
But it happens right from the beginning of some organisations. So that thing where companies will take on 100 graduates and say to them, only 30 of you will be left in 2 years. What does that say to you? It says, look around you, because there's 2 people here that you need to climb over if you want to stay here. So
It's
hard.
It's sort of how many organisations set up competition, but not healthy competition. I don't mind a bit of healthy competition so that we're all striving for more and continuous improvement and, but not if we're climbing over each other. And I can see how that's counterproductive to belonging. We're almost at the end of our conversation. I have a final question, which I do like to ask many of my guests, which is around the book that I'm writing called Beyond Discomfort. And I'm interested in what's the most uncomfortable thing that you've had to manage in yourself or address or have a conversation about as an inclusive leader?
I'll be honest with you, I'm far from perfect, and there are many things that I get wrong. This is a question for the world of work overall, which is challenge versus consensus. And I think it's something that you have to acknowledge as a leader, which is that you might well have 3 points of view in the room. And if you go for consensus, you might be getting half good of all three of them.
Yes.
But how do you get to the very best? Because probably if you've got those three opinions, everybody has worked quite hard to build their case. And as you say, what you need is everyone to understand that the competition is outside the company, not within the company, and that you want to get to the best answer. And there's the concept of that kind of dialectic. I say, I think the paintwork should be yellow, and you go, no, I think the paintwork should be blue. And we go, okay, well, let's go for green. And I think sometimes how you arrive at that and how people feel about having their yellow or their blue rejected, that's quite a nuanced thing in a situation where you're hoping to include everybody. Because what you don't want is smudge. So I've picked two colours that go quite well. But if I picked, I don't know, I'm insisting on, I can't even think what the colours would be. I'm insisting on green and you're insisting on brown, and together they just look like smudge, then it kind of doesn't work in the same way. And so I think that's the thing, that on an ongoing basis, to try and make sure everybody is heard and everybody's recognised, but not necessarily gets to win.
Yeah.
Because overall we're trying to win.
And that's uncomfortable, isn't it, as a leader, when you are really trying to create that inclusion, so aware of inclusion. If you've invited people to have their say, there's almost a framing piece that needs to happen up front, where you have to acknowledge that at some point I need to make a decision on this. However, I really would value all of your opinions so that we can close down on the right and the best way forward. But it might not be that everyone's version of what should be is what we do.
And I think under pressure is when that's difficult.
Yes.
So it's great when there's time and scope. When it's things, because we all work in situations that sometimes get very pressured, I think that's when those things can be uncomfortable. And it's about people having confidence in the leadership and knowing that their opinion is valued. And just because blue didn't win this time, it doesn't mean that you're wrong. It just means that people thought that yellow would work better in this instance. It's something around that.
Yes. Thank you so much, Sue. It has been an absolute pleasure to take a deep dive into your book, even though we've only skimmed the surface of it, I feel, because there's so much in there. If listeners out there have not read your book, I highly recommend getting a copy. How could they reach out to you? Where are you? Are you on social media?
I am at Sue U on Twitter is probably the best place. So yeah, the @ and then SUEU.
Brilliant. Well, the links, as always, to everything that Sue and I have spoken about is going to be on the usual page, avenirconsultingservices.com, under podcasts.
And I'm excited about your book. When's it out?
Oh, thank you. In theory, if all goes well with me handing it to the publisher in a couple of months' time, then it will be March, April next year.
Fantastic. I look forward to it.
Thank you so much, Sue.
Take care.
That concludes episode 32 of Why Care. There is so much to take away from this conversation when it comes to naming the deeply embedded societal stereotypes that prevent belonging, and what organisations should be doing to create collective ownership and accountability. Do let Sue and I know what you thought of today's show. You can find me on LinkedIn, Insta and Twitter with the handle @Nadia Nagamutu. As always, I really appreciate your support of this podcast through leaving a review on whatever platform you're listening and spreading the word by sharing it with your friends and family. Huge thanks to Kenji Productions for editing this podcast and Glory Olibori for supporting with the show notes and getting it out there on social media.